Few of Napoleon Bonaparte's marshals inspired greater confidence than Louis-Nicolas Davout. While men like Joachim Murat dazzled Europe with flamboyant cavalry charges, and Michel Ney earned fame for reckless courage, Davout built his reputation in a very different way. He was methodical where others were impulsive, disciplined where others relied upon inspiration, and calm where others surrendered to chaos. To his soldiers he was demanding, sometimes brutally so. To his fellow marshals he could seem cold, aloof, and uncompromising. But to Napoleon, there was no commander whose judgment inspired greater confidence. Unlike every other marshal of the empire, Davout never suffered a major battlefield defeat while commanding independently. Throughout more than 20 years of almost continuous warfare, he consistently accomplished what many believed impossible. It was for this unbreakable resolve that history would remember him by a name that perfectly reflected both the man and the commander: the Iron Marshal. Welcome back to the Marshalette. Today, we continue our series exploring the lives of the marshals of the First French Empire. In this episode, we'll examine one of Napoleon Bonaparte's most capable and dependable commanders, Marshal Louis-Nicolas Davout, and the man history remembers as the Iron Marshal. Throughout this biography, we'll follow Davout's remarkable journey from a young cavalry officer of the Ancien Regime to one of the greatest military commanders of the Napoleonic era. Whether you are a long-time student of military history or just beginning your journey, I hope you'll join us as we explore the lives, campaigns, triumphs, and legacies of the commanders who defined an age undreamed of. Louis-Nicolas Davout was born on May 10, 1770, at the Château d'Erneux in Burgundy. Unlike many of Napoleon's future marshals, who rose from humble beginnings during the French Revolution, Davout was born into an ancient Burgundian noble family whose military tradition had stretched back generations. From an early age, his future seemed predetermined. His father, Jean-François Davout, served as a cavalry officer before his death when Louis-Nicolas was still a child. Although the family retained its noble status, the loss of his father placed considerable responsibility upon the young Davout and instilled in him a seriousness that would remain throughout his life. Determined to follow his family's military tradition, he entered the Royal Military School at Auxerre before continuing his education at the prestigious École Militaire de Paris. There, he developed the habits that would define his entire career: precision, discipline, and an unwavering commitment to duty. Commissioned as a cavalry officer in 1788, Davout entered the French army only months before Europe was transformed forever by the outbreak of the French Revolution. For many noble officers, the revolution presented an impossible choice. Thousands abandoned France and joined the armies of Europe's monarchies in hopes of restoring the Bourbon monarchy. Davout, however, made a different decision. Though born into the nobility, he embraced many of the revolution's principles and remained loyal to France. His decision nearly destroyed his military career. During the Reign of Terror, noble birth alone was enough to arouse suspicion, and Davout was briefly removed from service. Fortunately for France and for Napoleon, that exile proved temporary. As the revolutionary armies expanded, experienced officers were desperately needed. Davout returned to active duty, quickly proving himself through competence rather than political connections. Promotion came steadily, not because he sought attention, but because his superiors repeatedly recognized his ability. Unlike many revolutionary generals who relied upon daring improvisation, Davout believed that victory was earned long before armies met upon the battlefield. Every march had to be organized, every soldier properly equipped, every officer held accountable, and every maneuver carefully rehearsed. These principles became the foundation of his command philosophy and would eventually produce what many historians consider the finest corps in Napoleon's Grande Armée. In 1798, Davout accompanied Napoleon on his ambitious expedition to Egypt. Intended to threaten British influence in the Eastern Mediterranean and ultimately disrupt Britain's trade with India, the campaign exposed French soldiers to harsh climates, unfamiliar diseases, and constant campaigning far from home. Although the Egyptian campaign ultimately failed to achieve its grand strategic objectives, it proved invaluable for Davout. Serving alongside Napoleon gave him first-hand experience observing the future emperor's operational genius. More importantly, Napoleon came to appreciate Davout's professionalism, intelligence, and reliability. Unlike many ambitious officers who sought personal glory, Davout focused solely on accomplishing his mission. When Napoleon returned to France and seized power during the coup of 18 Brumaire in 1799, Davout's fortunes rose alongside those of his commander. He was entrusted with increasingly important commands and became one of the officers upon whom Napoleon knew he could depend regardless of circumstances. That trust reached its highest expression in 1804, when Napoleon crowned himself Emperor of the French inside Notre Dame Cathedral. Only 18 generals received the newly created dignity of Marshal of the Empire. Louis-Nicolas Davout, barely 34 years old, was among them. Some questioned whether he was too young. Others believed more experienced generals deserved the honor. Napoleon disagreed. He recognized in Davout qualities that few others possessed: absolute loyalty, exceptional intelligence, and complete mastery of military organization. The emperor would soon be proven correct. The following year, Europe united once more against France. Austria, Russia, Great Britain, and several smaller states formed the Third Coalition, hoping to destroy Napoleon's empire before it could fully establish itself. Napoleon responded with one of history's greatest military campaigns. Marching his Grande Armée across Central Europe with astonishing speed, he surrounded and destroyed an Austrian army at Ulm, before advancing toward Moravia, where Russian and Austrian forces prepared for a decisive confrontation. That confrontation came on December 2nd, 1805, the Battle of Austerlitz. Stationed many miles away with Third Corps, Davout received urgent orders to reinforce Napoleon's vulnerable right flank. His soldiers immediately began one of the most extraordinary forced marches of the Napoleonic Wars. Covering nearly 70 miles in less than 48 hours, they marched through freezing weather with almost no rest. Many men collapsed from exhaustion, others fell asleep while marching. Still, they continued forward. Reaching the battlefield just as combat erupted, Davout's exhausted veterans were immediately thrown into some of the fiercest fighting of the day. Repeated waves of Austro-Russian troops struck Napoleon's deliberately weakened right flank, believing they had discovered the French army's greatest vulnerability. Instead, they encountered Davout. Though badly outnumbered and physically exhausted from their forced march, Third Corps fought with extraordinary determination. Battalion after battalion held its ground against repeated assaults, buying Napoleon the precious time he needed to launch his decisive attack against the Allied center at the Pratzen Heights. As Napoleon shattered the enemy's center, Davout continued resisting relentless attacks on the French right. By day's end, the Allied army had collapsed. Napoleon had won the greatest victory of his career. Later, he freely acknowledged the importance of Davout's contribution, recognizing that without Third Corps' incredible march and stubborn defense, Austerlitz might have ended very differently. For Davout, however, an even greater achievement still lay ahead. 1 year later, Europe again went to war. Prussia, alarmed by Napoleon's growing power, declared war on France, initiating the War of the Fourth Coalition. Confident in the reputation earned during the days of Frederick the Great, the Prussian army marched to confront Napoleon. Many expected a short campaign. Instead, they encountered one of the finest military machines Europe had ever seen. As Napoleon advanced through central Germany, he believed he was pursuing the main Prussian army toward the town of Jena. Davout, meanwhile, marched independently several miles to the north with his Third Corps. On the morning of October 14, 1806, Dense fog covered the countryside around the village of Auerstadt. As the mist slowly lifted, Davout's scouts reported alarming news. An enormous Prussian force was approaching. Within hours, it became clear that Davout had not encountered a mere advance guard. Standing before him was the main Prussian army itself, more than 60,000 soldiers commanded by King Frederick William III, the veteran Duke of Brunswick, and many of Prussia's most experienced generals. Against them stood barely 27,000 French soldiers. Most commanders would have withdrawn. Davout prepared to attack. Most commanders, faced with an enemy more than twice their strength, would have sought to delay the battle until reinforcements could arrive. Davout did the opposite. Without hesitation, he ordered his divisions forward, determined to seize the initiative before the Prussians could fully deploy. His years of relentless training had transformed Third Corps into perhaps the finest formation in the Grande Armée, and now that discipline would be put to the ultimate test. Throughout the morning, fierce fighting erupted around the villages of Hassenhausen, Spielberg, and the rolling countryside surrounding Auerstadt. Again and again, the columns of Prussian infantry supported by cavalry attempted to overwhelm the smaller French force. Each attack met an unbreakable wall. Davout carefully shifted his divisions from one threatened sector to another, reinforcing weak points before they could collapse. His artillery positioned on commanding ground toward devastating gaps through advancing Prussian formations, while disciplined volleys from his infantry halted charge after charge. Rather than committing his entire force at once, Davout fed fresh units into the battle exactly where they were needed, ensuring that exhausted regiments were continually replaced by rested ones. It was a master class in battlefield command. Early in the engagement, the Prussians suffered a crippling blow, with the Duke of Brunswick, commander of the army and one of Europe's most experienced soldiers, was mortally wounded. With barely 27,000 men, Davout had defeated an army of more than 60,000, one personally accompanied by the King of Prussia himself. Even more remarkable was the irony that unfolded afterward. Only a few miles away, Napoleon had fought the Battle of Jena against what he believed was the main Prussian force. Initially convinced that his own victory had destroyed Prussia's principal army, Napoleon soon discovered that Davout had actually faced and defeated the true main force at Auerstadt. The emperor was overwhelmed with admiration. He reportedly declared that if he had lost the Battle of Jena, Davout's victory at Auerstadt would still have saved the campaign. In recognition of his extraordinary achievement, Napoleon bestowed upon him the title Duke of Auerstadt, one of the empire's highest honors. Many military historians continue to regard Auerstadt as the greatest tactical victory achieved by any of Napoleon's marshals. If Austerlitz had demonstrated Davout's reliability, Auerstadt proved his greatness. Over the next several years, Napoleon increasingly relied upon him whenever success was uncertain. That confidence was rewarded once again during the War of the Fifth Coalition in 1809. As Austria launched another attempt to overthrow French dominance in Europe, Davout's Third Corps became the cornerstone of Napoleon's operations in Germany. At the Battle of Eckmühl, Davout once again found himself facing superior Austrian numbers. Operating independently for much of the campaign, he skillfully maneuvered his corps while delaying the Austrian advance long enough for Napoleon to concentrate the remainder of the Grande Armée. When the decisive battle began on April 22nd, Davout launched a powerful assault against the Austrian left flank. His carefully coordinated attacks shattered the enemy's defenses and forced a general retreat, opening the road to Vienna once again. Napoleon later praised Davout's performance as one of the decisive factors in the campaign. Only months later came the Battle of Wagram. One of the largest battles Europe had ever witnessed, Wagram involved nearly 300,000 soldiers spread across miles of open countryside along the Danube. Davout commanded the French right wing. While fierce fighting raged across the battlefield. Napoleon entrusted Davout with the critical task of turning the Austrian left flank. Once again, Davout demonstrated extraordinary patience, carefully coordinating infantry, cavalry, and artillery before launching his assault. When the attack finally came, it struck with overwhelming force. Village after village fell into French hands as Austrian resistance gradually crumbled. Davout's advance forced the enemy line to bend backward, creating an opening Napoleon needed to deliver the decisive blow elsewhere on the battlefield. The victory secured French dominance over Austria for another generation. By now, Davout's reputation had become legendary. His soldiers respected him deeply, though few would have described him as affectionate. He demanded immaculate uniforms, disciplined marching, perfectly maintained equipment, and absolute obedience to orders. Officers who failed in their duties received sharp criticism regardless of rank. Yet, unlike many commanders of the era, Davout expected far more from himself than he did from his men. He inspected camps personally. He ensured supplies reached his soldiers. He rewarded merit regardless of birth. Above all, he insisted that civilians under French occupation be treated with greater restraint than was common in Napoleonic warfare. Looting and indiscipline were punished severely, giving Third Corps a reputation for professionalism unmatched elsewhere in the Grande Armée. Then came the campaign that would destroy Napoleon's empire. In June of 1812, nearly 500,000 French and Allied soldiers crossed the Niemen River into Russia. Davout commanded the powerful First Corps, comprised primarily with French veterans. Throughout the advance, his veterans spearheaded many of Napoleon's operations. They fought fiercely at Smolensk, forcing Russian defenders from the city after bitter street fighting that left much of it in flames. Weeks later came the Battle of Borodino, one of the bloodiest single days of the Napoleonic Wars. Davout argued in favor of a wide flanking maneuver that he believed might force the Russians to abandon their fortified positions without the enormous casualties that a frontal assault would require. Napoleon rejected the proposal. Instead, Davout's corps was ordered to attack directly against some of the strongest Russian fortifications on the battlefield. The fighting became horrific. French infantry repeatedly stormed the great earthworks known as the Bagratian Flèches under relentless artillery and musket fire. Davout himself was thrown violently from his horse during the assault, briefly raising fears that he had been killed. Ignoring his injuries, he quickly remounted and returned to the front, continuing to direct his corps throughout the remainder of the battle. Although Borodino ended in a costly French victory, the enormous casualties foreshadowed the disaster that lay ahead. As winter descended upon Russia, Napoleon's army began its catastrophic retreat from Moscow. Cold, starvation, disease, constant Russian attacks, the Grande Armée gradually disintegrated. The Iron Marshal had survived, but the Grande Armée never truly recovered. Although the Russian campaign had shattered the Grande Armée, Louis-Nicolas Davout remained one of Napoleon's most dependable commanders. As the Sixth Coalition advanced into Germany in 1813, Napoleon faced an enemy growing stronger with every passing month. France could no longer replace its experienced soldiers, and many of the empire's finest veterans had been left behind in the snows of Russia. Yet even in these desperate circumstances, Napoleon continued to rely upon the Iron Marshal. Following the disastrous French defeat at the Battle of Leipzig in October 1813, Napoleon entrusted Davout with one of the empire's most difficult assignments, the defense of the vital port city of Hamburg. The mission carried enormous strategic importance. Hamburg controlled one of Northern Europe's principal ports and served as a critical base for French operations along the Elbe River. Holding the city tied down tens of thousands of coalition troops that might otherwise have marched against Napoleon in France. If anyone could hold it, Napoleon believed it was Davout. Upon arriving in Hamburg, Davout immediately set to work. He strengthened the city's fortifications, repaired defensive walls, expanded artillery positions, stockpiled food and ammunition, and organized every available soldier into an efficient fighting force. Nothing was left to chance. Soon, coalition armies composed primarily of Russian, Prussian, and Swedish forces surrounded Hamburg, and the siege began. Throughout the long months that followed, artillery bombarded the city, while enemy forces searched for weaknesses in its defenses. Food became increasingly scarce, disease spread among both soldiers and civilians, and conditions inside Hamburg steadily deteriorated. Still, Davout refused every demand for surrender. Rather than passively waiting behind the city's walls, he ordered frequent sorties against the besieging forces. These sudden attacks disrupted enemy siege works, destroyed artillery positions, and forced the coalition to commit far more troops than anticipated. His garrison remained organized even as the empire itself crumbled around them. Then came the astonishing news. In April 1814, Napoleon abdicated the throne. Across Europe, French garrisons surrendered one after another. Hamburg did not. Davout refused to capitulate based upon rumor or incomplete reports. He insisted upon receiving official confirmation from the legitimate French government before laying down his arms. Some criticized his stubbornness. Others admired his unwavering sense of duty. Only after receiving formal orders from the restored Bourbon monarchy, confirming that peace had been concluded, did Davout agree to evacuate the city. The manner in which he departed reflected the discipline that had defined his entire career. His army marched out in perfect formation. Its artillery accompanied it, its regimental colors flew proudly, its weapons remained in the hands of French soldiers. Many historians regard the defense of Hamburg as one of the greatest defensive operations of the Napoleonic Wars, a final demonstration of Davout's remarkable ability to maintain order, discipline, and effectiveness under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Following Napoleon's abdication, Davout briefly withdrew from public life. His retirement, however, would prove short-lived. Less than a year later, in March 1815, Napoleon escaped from the island of Elba and returned to France. The period that followed became known as the 100 Days. As former marshals chose between the restored Bourbon monarchy and their former emperor, Davout faced perhaps the greatest political decision of his life. He chose his emperor. The emperor immediately appointed him Minister of War. It was a position of immense responsibility. While Napoleon prepared to confront the armies assembling against him, Davout worked tirelessly to rebuild France's military. He organized units, restored discipline, secured weapons and equipment, and oversaw the mobilization of thousands of soldiers in only a matter of weeks. Historians believe no other marshal could have accomplished the task as effectively. Yet fate denied him one final opportunity to command troops in the field. While Napoleon marched north toward Belgium, Davout remained in Paris, managing the nation's military administration. As a result, he took no part in the Battle of Waterloo. When news of Napoleon's defeat reached the capital, France once again faced invasion. Davout recognized that further fighting would only bring unnecessary destruction. Displaying the same calm judgment that had characterized his entire career, he negotiated the orderly withdrawal of the French army from Paris, helping to prevent further bloodshed during one of the nation's darkest moments. Unlike Marshal Ney, whose support of Napoleon during the 100 Days led to his execution, Davout escaped severe punishment. Although temporarily removed from public office, he gradually regained the confidence of the Bourbon government. In time, he was restored to royal favor and appointed a peer of France, allowing him to spend his remaining years away from the battlefield. Louis-Nicolas Davout died in Paris on June 1st, 1823. He was only 53 years old. Despite his extraordinary military achievements, Davout was not universally admired. He possessed few of Murat's charisma, Ney's dramatic courage, or Lannes' easy camaraderie. He could be stern, uncompromising, and intensely demanding. Many fellow marshals considered him arrogant, while some officers found his relentless standards almost impossible to satisfy. Yet those very qualities produced results. His corps consistently marched farther, fought harder, and maintained better discipline than almost any other formation in La Grande Armée. Where other commanders tolerated disorder, Davout corrected it. Where others accepted mediocrity, he demanded excellence. His soldiers often feared him, but they also trusted him. Unlike many commanders of the era, Davout rarely wasted lives through recklessness or personal ambition. Every attack was carefully planned, every movement deliberately calculated. His men understood that when the Iron Marshal committed them to battle, it was because he believed victory could be achieved. That trust was rewarded again and again. Unlike nearly every other marshal of the empire, Davout never suffered a major independent battlefield defeat. From Austerlitz and Auerstadt to Eckmühl, Wagram, Russia, and Hamburg, his record remained one of extraordinary consistency. Even Napoleon, never generous with praise, held Davout in exceptional regard. The emperor once remarked that if he had two Davouts, he could have conquered the world. Whether those exact words were ever spoken has been debated by historians, but they capture a sentiment shared by so many who served alongside him. Today, historians widely regard Louis-Nicolas Davout as Napoleon's finest corps commander, and by many accounts the greatest of all the marshals. For more than 20 years, he embodied professionalism, loyalty, and military excellence. Rising from a young cavalry officer to Marshal of the Empire, Duke of Auerstadt, Prince of Eckmühl, and Minister of War, he forged a legacy unmatched by any of his contemporaries. He sought neither glory nor applause. He sought victory. And through discipline, preparation, and an unshakable sense of duty, Louis-Nicolas Davout earned a place among history's greatest commanders. It is of little wonder that history remembers him by the title that perfectly captured both the man and the soldier, the Iron Marshal. If you enjoyed this biography, consider leaving a like, subscribing to the Marshalette, and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Let us know who your favorite marshal of the Empire is and why. Your suggestion may become the focus of a future episode. Thank you for watching. Until next time, join us as we continue our march through military history, exploring the commanders, campaigns, and empires that shaped an age undreamed of.